was a sight from my soul.
Welcome to the Inspired Evolution, and it is a humble treat to be here today. We have with us Jonni Pollard. Jonni, how are you, brother?
I'm very good, Amrit. How are you, brother?
Yeah, I'm doing good. For those tuning into Jonni for the first time, hold up just a sec. Let me do the honors. Jonni is a meditation and wisdom teacher who's dedicated his life to sharing ancient knowledge. He specializes in teaching the art of embodying our true nature to live the most meaningful life possible. Author, speaker, dude, it's all happening. It is such a treat to have you here in this space, brother bear. Welcome to the Inspired Evolution.
Glad to be here.
I would love to know, where did this all begin? How did you end up on this path? I do not feel like nowadays meditation, wisdom, sure, much more part of the common vernacular. Purpose is a conversation more and more of us are having. But this seems to have been your path for a little bit longer than the average Joe blogs, let's call it that. Yeah. How did this become your path?
I mean, to be completely honest with you, I don't think that I was on any other trajectory. My awareness as far back as I can remember, there was always a deep sense of importance about this life, a sense that something was awry, that I clearly didn't fit in because of something foundational about my perspective that I wasn't willing to let go of. Mm-hmm. I felt a great discomfort at the social pressure and the cultural pressure of trying to conform, trying to fit in. Mm-hmm. And, out of respect, I think I made a good attempt at various phases, through my childhood into my adolescence and adulthood. But, it became very clear that the exercise was totally futile to the freedom of my spirit. And it was never an option for me to compromise that. I was never sufficiently desperate or afraid of sort of validation from the world around me in order to me to feel okay about my position in life, or my sensibility, how I saw things and what I believed to be of value and not. And so I just was, I can't really take much credit for it. I was just instinctively devoted to honoring my spirit, what felt good, and not compromising and exposing myself to things that didn't. And, as a result, school was a real challenge for me because it demanded that I conform and participate in things that had very little meaning to me. I could make no sense of what it was that I was being asked to do, despite my many attempts at requesting some insight. What is the relevance of this really? And my teacher's inability to sufficiently, provide me with something other than some tokenistic, this will help you get a good mark so you can go to university and do what you really want to do. But I'm like, do I really want to go to university?
that? Shush, stop it. Like, this line of questioning must cease.
Yeah, exactly. So the net result of that was that I felt relatively isolated in my worldview, and had to some extent live in the closet, and then in another extent, be quite overtly rebellious in my teenage years, anti-establishment, very punk, got tattoos at an early age, lots of piercings, and wore silly clothes, to kind of define myself as being something other than, what society, was demanding. And I wore that kind of as a medallion quite proudly until ultimately I realized that my rejection and disdain for the world was actually causing a deep illness in me, like a spiritual illness, because what my spirit really wanted was to belong, because that's our nature. And that's what I think led me into a more sort of sophisticated approach to understanding who I was as a human and who we are as human beings and what life means really. And yeah, I think in my sort of mid to late teens is where it all started to, as I describe it, the cracks in the veneer of my disdain for conformity, because that's how I define myself, is just saying, I don't belong to you. I'm kind of like, fuck you, and all of that started to crack. And yeah, that led me on a beautiful journey of self-discovery, which I'm still on to this day.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that, brother. The I guess my question was geared initially around a little bit towards that particular juncture that you just left off at. The going from rejection to belonging. That is quite a seismic shift to rejecting. And I think there's a whole journey in there where we sort of want to be something different, and then we realize that everything is as it is, and that acceptance is a whole journey in itself. But I think there's definitely more to unpack in around the rejection and potentially what illnesses that was creating within you, and potentially that is what brought you to the sense of belonging. But what was the shift there that went from rejection to belonging, like rejecting what was out there to finding yourself belonging in it all?
It was a deep pain in my heart. It was a strong sense that something was really wrong. And, retrospectively, I'm like, well, of course, because, what I've come to realize is that the full expression of our humanity, a sense of wholeness within ourselves, comes from the understanding that we belong to the greater whole, that we are inextricably linked and connected, that our humanity is a thing that is expressed in a fabric that we all belong to. It is a sensitivity and awareness to the needs of the greater whole and how I'm bringing my individuality to serve that, to elevate that, to ensure that it is stable and balanced. And, it's my perspective that we are so far from, at this stage, as a species, from truly embracing and living this on a day-to-day level. At least the vast majority. There's a great many on the planet that are truly dedicated and courageously so, because there's a great force of rejection out there, and so it requires a great amount of character and volition to hold steady in the face of these times for those souls that are deeply sensitive and feel the call to belong and to nurture that belonging, despite the fact that it's throwing mud in our face. So. And I felt that deeply, and it was a conflict that I could not resolve, nor that I appeared to not be able to resolve by myself, but I could no longer ignore. That was the catalyst. That was the shift. It's like, okay, I can't ignore this anymore, and it's plaguing me, and I don't appear to have the tools within me right now, but I had to really understand what it is I'm grappling with. And that subsequently led me to India, your motherland, where I engaged in the teachings of a cousin tradition of yours, and found the Vedic tradition, and found an enormous amount of insight and support in the process that I was actually going through. What I realized was that I was just going through what millions and millions of humans through time immemorial have gone through eventually in their evolution of awakening. And there was beautiful language and a systematic way of looking at it and approaching it. And so I did that. The bridge for me to make this transition from embracing who I was rather than defining myself by who I was not. And that ultimately led me to, the realization of what we are as a species and the responsibility that we have as individuals. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I do want to ask about that journey and your realizations from that time in India that really settled in. But before we go there, and I'm sure we're going to end up referencing the golden sequence in and around some of that for sure.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to tune into is, knowing that on your journey, that the path was always meant to be the way that it was, even in its creativeness and its destruction as it was. And yet at this time, it seems like, there are those that are, we need better languaging, but let's just say waking up, and that those that are potentially business as usual, let's just call it that. And the majority seems to be business as usual, despite some of the symptoms around the world, which is like, hey, business as usual may potentially not be the way that will actually sustain our humanity going forward. Is that also on its own perfect path on the macro level as well? And is it part of the necessary climate for the awakening that we're going through? Any reflections on that?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a really big and important question. And it's a complex answer, because there is the sort of the cosmic view, the 40,000 foot view, where we're taking into consideration the greater mechanism of existence, which is that everything is cyclical. Everything grows in cycles and in process, and within any process there is a moment of creation, and then what's created is sustained, maintained for the length of time that is relevant for its life, that serves the purpose for creation until something new comes. And when something new comes, what has been maintained for a time no longer is relevant, and it gets relegated into a process of dissolution. And then it dissolves. And we can observe this happening in our physiology, in nature, everywhere. This system of creation, maintenance, and dissolution is foundational to nature and human existence. And we can observe it literally everywhere, all the time. It's always at play, particularly in human consciousness and the human psyche and our relationship to things. And so, if we take the position that humanity is going through a new creation cycle, where what we were maintaining that has become no longer relevant is in a process of being dissolved to create further space for something new to emerge. And it appears that as a part of our condition, I would say, our resistance to change is simply because we are so deeply traumatized by the environment that we have created, which is devoid of our humanity and devoid of deep relationship with nature itself. And as a result, neurologically, we become bound by our resistance for change. Because when we are stressed and we are under pressure, what we don't want to deal with is any new information. What we want to do is sufficiently process what's taking place in this moment to feel like we can get on top of it, that we can face the danger. So the part of the brain that's capable of actually processing new information and innovating and creating gets shut down for the purpose of dealing with the danger that's before us. Now, the danger realistically is a delusion. It's fabricated as a result of our brain being trapped in this fight or flight state. So, if we're feeling anxious and we're feeling danger biologically, then the mind will start to create stories to reinforce why it is we're feeling this way. We start to actually fabricate delusions of why there is danger. And then ultimately it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we tell ourselves long enough that there is something to be afraid of and that, we are in danger, then we will manifest that as reality, because we act in accordance with our expectation. We're expecting danger. And if we keep expecting it, it just materializes. And so this is the pickle that the world has got itself in, because it's of its inability to recover from the the inability to adapt to an environment it hasn't biologically
The
evolved
fear
in.
state. Yeah.
Yeah. This environment that we live in, the world that we live in, is not how we evolved. And we know that biology takes a long time to evolve. And it's only been 12,000 years since we were living as hunters and gatherers, in tribes deeply connected with the earth, in tribes of no more than 30 or 40 people. And now look at the way we live. It's not a long time. Our biology hasn't evolved apart from some aspect of our gut that processes starches, apparently, because of the bread we eat. That's the only thing that they've really noted that has evolved in that 12,000 years. So we're carrying around these bodies of hunters and gatherers, and we're living in these, these modern metropolis, overwhelming cities that are, wreaking havoc with our nervous system and our brains to process what's really going on here.
Yeah.
And so, yes, so from the 40,000 foot view, everything's cool. But down here, as humans on the ground, it's a different story. It's a really, and we don't want to dehumanize, by the way, by spiritualizing, over spiritualizing, by getting into this kind of cosmic perspective. Everything's fine, man. It's just an evolutionary cycle of humanity. And, we can't brush off what we're experiencing just because we have the 40,000 foot view. We also have to tend to the individual experience that we're having right now, process it, make meaning of it, and reclaim our humanity on this sort of grassroots here and now level, and bring our power of insight that we gain from our 40,000 foot view into our moment to moment interactions to liberate the design, liberate the condition of the brain, and spread that, which is essentially, the work that you're doing, as far as I can see.
Touch wood. One of the interesting pieces, and again, what's precipitating for me over at this side at the moment is, like the biology, our evolution biologically, 12,000 years, big time scale. But even like sometimes I take a moment, brother, just to sit there and go, I look at some of these, and I've started getting into Indigenous Australian art, and some of even just some of these old photographs, they're like just over 100 years old. They're not that old. They're just over 100 years old. And there's like one person and of a particular skin color and another person pulling like three people with shackles around their neck of another skin color. And I'm just like, that's that's 3 generations. That's not that long ago.
And that was happening in the 60s.
Right? And so the thing that's precipitating for me is I can see how much this is dissolving in our time, like this unit, like maybe we can call it unity consciousness. It sounds a bit cheesy, but whatever. This conversation around potentially like more unity, right? And I love the aspect of potentially, if you wanted to rebrand spirituality, I humbly feel like potentially you could just rebrand it as unity in many ways. But
Agreed.
more and more unity is coming through. But then exactly what you were alluding to is like, when we were like warring tribes for so long, and even, like we expect so much of ourselves in our human condition to be better, to be this unified version of ourselves. And yet we've got to try and keep up with, or the biology's got to try and keep up with the expectations that we're setting for ourselves, or our consciousness is setting for ourselves in some way. Am I making sense in the way that I'm articulating what I'm articulating?
Yeah. Well, what I heard was that that it's clear that there is a change taking place. That only 100 years ago there were the magnificent indigenous people of this land roaming freely in some areas. At least 200 years ago, maybe not quite 100 years ago. The atrocities were certainly happening 100 years ago. And then, now we're at a point where we're in deep reflection at least I think a majority of this country are in deep reflection about the atrocity of the way the Indigenous people were treated. And there is, through that, memory of what this nation was built on, the atrocity, a deep sense of remorse, which brings us into a deeper connection of the state of unity that you're talking about. And, let's just hope that that continues. The subject of the First Nations people is, one that's dear to my heart. My first spiritual teacher was actually an Indigenous man from the Bunjalung tribe. Coincidentally, is where I live now. I was living in Sydney at the time that I was being taught by him, but now living in the place where he was originally from. And the insight that I gleaned, just glimpses, because what the Indigenous people are, the Australian Aboriginals, so profound in their connection to reality, not just to the land, to reality. Their consciousness state that they were in for such a long period of time is so profound that it's not comprehensible to the average person. They existed in a paradigm so far beyond how we're existing right now, and there's just so much to learn from them, and so much to learn in the reconciliation and the healing of what was done in those times, and what is still being done to some extent. There's still a lot of work to do in terms of reconciliation. But yeah, for Australia, we have that as a roadmap for how we can return to unity, is by taking the deep wisdom from these wonderful people that had it and lived it for so long, passed it on for generation after generation, over 100,000 years. 100,000 years. We can't even get our head around that.
Nah, not even close.
Live in harmony with the land and their culture, and it lived on, deeply spiritual. Anyway, yeah, we could talk about that one for the whole hour and a half if you like.
All right, well, let's take a little sidestep there. So we were talking before about how there's always being space for creation, there's being space held for maintaining things, and then things are dissolving. And the little pre-programmed Indian bias version of me was like, there's a little bit of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So let's talk a little bit about the influence that Vedic philosophy had on you at this particular juncture. So what was it about Vedic philosophy that actually really, because I'm sure in your journey from things being out of alignment to, finally that sense of belonging, you would have interfaced with many things, but it seems like going to India was a call, and interfacing with Vedic Vedanta philosophy was actually something that really clicked in. What was it about Vedic philosophy for you? Can you share some of your insights with us?
Yeah, it speaks at a very granular level. I think the nature of my mind is that I like detail. I like the detail of things to be clarified and answered. I would have been one of those kids that would have been like, yeah, but why? Yeah, but why? Yeah, but why? Yeah, but why? And I was able to do that with the Vedic worldview, and every yeah, but why delivered a whole nother dimension of insight and knowledge. And then I go, okay, yeah, but why? And then, and the deeper I probed, it had an answer for me. And it made so much sense. But the way it was delivered was, hey, but don't take my word for it. See if you can detect this on the level of your own experience. The beauty of this knowledge, the pure Vedic knowledge, is that it's delivered as a proposition for your personal investigation It's not a doctrine. It's not dogmatic. It's anti that, actually. It's the opposite spectrum. It's not interested in you conforming and sort of adhering to some philosophical perspective. I wouldn't even call it Vedic philosophy, to be honest with you. I call it Vedic knowledge, because knowledge has utility. You know, it is all about the means by which you can implement your own personal awareness in a particular way to be in the most dynamic relationship with this moment, to contain as much information, aka complexity, and begin the process of reconciling the paradoxes that appear in our consciousness, that appear inside of ourselves, and which is what any good knowledge should do, is lead you to resolve, to understand the underlying truth of reality, but not as an idea. And by the way, you'll never understand the truth of reality conceptually. It is an experience that's had. It's a state of being. And the emphasis was always placed on this, first and foremost. There's a slogan, you know, experience first, knowledge second. And so I was led into a series of techniques and processes, including meditation, that refined my senses and my awareness, my perception, and my faculties of discernment to a point where I was able to hear the knowledge with some context to what it's pointing to. Whereas if you just hear the knowledge without any shift in consciousness first, if you're not rendering the mind capable of absorbing what's being said, then it's just going to remain in an echo chamber of your mind.
More bits just flying past you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I just feel so incredibly fortunate that I was able to be exposed to teachers that were able to convey this to me and teach me this, and create the foundations for how I would process absolutely every bit of information that I could then render into knowledge and then embody in some way that becomes wisdom. And so, you know, when I refer to myself as a wisdom teacher, it's not that what I'm teaching is wisdom. Here's my pearls of wisdom. It's here's the means by which you can gain access to your own. I teach people how to gain access to the place where wisdom is within inside of themselves. And this was the distinction that was made when I was taught, is that, you know, all the knowledge is within me if I know how to access it. And I was masterfully trained into how to gain access to that.
I love that.
And that's what I share.
Would you be willing to share some of that with us today? How do we go about accessing some of the wisdom that is inside us, some of the knowledge that is within us? What are some of the best practices in your opinion, or some takeaway practices for those tuning in to this episode?
Yeah, I could lay out a broad brushstroke sort of approach. The first is to be willing to introduce new habits that are going to cause some kind of change in the physiology. What I mean by physiology is the brain and the nervous system. At the moment, if you find yourself trapped or stuck in thinking and feelings that limit your capacity to see outside of the limiting ideas that these thoughts and feelings impose upon you, feeling like you're in a prison of your own mind, in your own body. If you are somebody that is experiencing this and desiring to be free of it, first you need to be willing to sit in the discomfort of this and to accept that this is where you're at. It's only through acceptance, which seems counterintuitive. Normally, because of the nature of our fight or flight response, the instinct is to fight against it, to fight against the thoughts, to fight against the feelings, to push through it, to resist, to defend. But all this does is it creates a fracture inside of ourselves, a split, and we're creating more mess to clean up. Ultimately, what we're seeking to do is to unify the experience of ourselves. So we're not fragmented. We're not in battle with ourselves. There's only one you. It's a condition of a mind that is exposed to undue pressure, that hasn't been able to sufficiently recover, that finds itself at odds with itself.
Mm.
And so what we're seeking to do is to establish a habit of identifying when we find ourselves in conflict with ourselves and to revert to a deeper state. Now, the only way we can access a deeper state is if we cultivate it. This is where we introduce meditation. Meditation is a practice that establishes the foundation of the self. It actually, beyond our intellectual reckoning, exposes ourselves to the direct experience of what we are, which is essentially a dynamic, intelligent, abstract field of awareness that has the capacity structured within it to respond to any challenge or demand that appears at odds to reconcile. It has the capacity to reconcile by its very nature. And the more we expose ourselves to this unbounded awareness, the more capable we are of drawing from it in moments when we find ourselves torn within ourselves, at odds, in battle. And that reconciliation becomes the replacement habit of defending or attacking some part of ourselves or another. And this is a habit that needs to be introduced and practiced. And my book, The Golden Sequence, is all about this: how to actually entrain the brain to begin utilizing what it's cultivating as a result of the meditation practice. I think everybody needs to meditate, period. Everyone needs to meditate.
You and me both.
Yeah. And
yeah.
And then so once we've got sufficient awareness to become curious about what it is that, where it is the source of our pain and fear is, to confront our past, confront and resolve the trauma of our childhood, of our past. And we are, by humans, all carrying some form of trauma. We cannot exist in this world without being, at least in some way, partially traumatized, because this world is a violation to our spiritual nature. It just is. The moment you come out, it's a violation of our deep spiritual nature. And we become conditioned by the coarseness of this reality. And as a result, we become desensitized, and we lose sense of things that we need to remain in contact with in order for us to feel well, to feel whole, to feel our total self. And so the way in which we can reclaim our whole total self is by confronting where it is our trauma lies and going through a process of healing that. Well, there's a variety of different ways in which you can go about doing that. Psychotherapy coupled with somatic healing, coupled with meditation, coupled with whatever you can throw at it, really. Depending on how deep your trauma is, there are many different tools that you can use that enable you to gain clarity about where it is you have come from, what your story is, and to what extent that story has suppressed the expression of your spirit. And the sooner we can come to terms with this and become aware of what it is we're carrying around with us, we can begin rewriting the script. We can recontextualize the story that is being told by our scared, wounded child. We can transfer that into the hands of our more enlightened adult self. And furthermore, continue editing that story as we become increasingly more enlightened, introducing greater expressions of compassion and understanding for where we've come from, for those that have violated us, to those that, have not understood what it means to nurture a growing, child into a fully empowered adult human. So there's that, confronting the trauma. And then it is coming to terms with your power, like really investigating the reality of the implication of your existence and recognizing that You do not exist in isolation, and no thought, no deed, no feeling, nothing that is had by you is had in isolation. You are perpetually broadcasting into a field that we share that ultimately informs the whole thing of who and what it is. We are constantly informing each other of who and what we are. And we need to embrace the responsibility of the immenseness of our power to inform the collective of who and what it is by starting to act and behave in micro moments, in every incremental moment, in accordance with what we value most deeply and to that which we hold sacred. And then as we start to get a grip on all of that, to start ritualizing the moment more, sanctifying everything, making sacred everything that we engage in, cherishing your deepest and most important relationships, and making it of the greatest importance, that you are the best version of yourself is always present, reminding everybody around you of their worthiness of your love, and therefore their capacity to be reciprocal in that. Because there's nothing more elevating than being in the presence of someone who demonstrates your worthiness. Because that's the thing that awakens the human heart, is when somebody can feel loved by somebody, seen fully, and honored in that way. And in that it inspires the heart almost involuntarily to reciprocate, right? You just want to give back. You want to give back. And then what we create is something very groovy. And to me, this is the only way the world will change. The world can only change through micro conscious activism, where human hearts open and share, with a sort of a fearless attitude, a courageous attitude, and make themselves available in the most mundane moments. Because the profoundness of our humanity is expressed, I believe, in the most mundane moments. I'm finding increasingly more and more I'm seeking less wow moments in my life, and as in being on a stage in front of 10,000 people leading a mass meditation, which I used to love to do, just loved it. And I'm less inclined to want to do that and just hang out with my wife and my 2-year-old daughter and my family and just my friends and just have intimate conversations like this. I'm finding, because I'm noticing that that's far more sustainable and far more impactful, really, at the end of the day, because the more intimate we can get, the deeper we can go. The deeper we can go, the more we understand. The more we are sharing, the circuit becomes strong, and the velocity of energy that exchanges becomes more impactful, because it's our connections that send the signal out into the world. Us in isolation is one thing, but us in union, in the unity thing that you're talking about, is the thing that creates the effect in the field. How we demonstrate how two states of consciousness can come together and really see and feel each other is where it's at. And all we need is people, everyday people doing it, and the world will change. Yeah.
I love that. Wow.
Our big problems have small.
That's what I'm hearing.
All the micro. That's the thing. We need to start thinking like that. All the big problems require micro activism to reverse it. It's not one person or one institution's role to fix the world.
Yeah, as you're sharing that, what's precipitating for me is, my wife shared this with me the other day. There's these two ladders side by side, and one has heaps of rungs, all tightly packed in together. And there's one ladder which has 5 rungs, and they both go to heaven, right? And but on the first one, the person's kind of gently, step by step, making his way up the ladder. And in the second one, the person can't even reach the first rung because he's trying to make a massive first step, And that's really what I'm hearing here is, all the little micro habits, micro moments show up to help you cultivate ultimately that which you're trying to attract and be and become, and the shift that you want to basically see and be a part of.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all internally referenced at the start. If you really want to make a change, you just get very intimate with what's going on in here. It's all in here. And then everything that comes out of here is what you're exporting for the good of all. We're not importers. We are exporters. That's how we need to shift our consciousness. But prior to that, it's all about what can I import to make this better?
Takers and
What can I
givers.
get from you?
Take. Yeah.
Yeah. Take. I need validation from you. I need this. I need that. Whatever. We need to flip that model and recognize that everything that we're seeking is actually inside. And that sounds cliche, but it's true. It's just the reality of the situation. What we're seeking actually is just an understanding of what we are. And what we are is always present. We're always here. That's the good thing about all of this. The thing you're seeking is right here, right now.
Dare you look? And I think that leads into my next question is, Jonni, you worked with quite a few people in this space. And I've got my own set of answers to this question, but I'd love to sort of unpack it with you. Is what do you think are people's resistances to looking within? What is the resistance to doing that body of work when it, like you said, in many ways, it's a lifetime's work, and in many ways it's simple. So, it's kind of, there's that juxtaposition to it, but the resistance to going there for so many, is it just the fear is so large?
Yeah, I think, I touched on it before. I think it has largely to do with the condition of the nervous system and the way in which the brain functions have been habituated. We're trapped in a cycle of desperation and survival. We've been deeply indoctrinated into a value system that is about how you are seen in society, and what's important to acquire in order to have some sort of relevance and significance and status. And that's for the people that are kind of on top of it. The people that aren't really on top of it are just trying to make enough money to pay their rent, if they're lucky, pay off a mortgage, to feed themselves, their family, and have enough recreational time to perhaps meet somebody or have experiences that are expressive of this thing inside me that I haven't spent much time really looking at and understanding. So there is a cultural vacuum of the substance that's required that becomes the fabric in which we can cross the divide. There's a vacuum sucking the thing that we can build a bridge to the self. Very little about our society says go within, take responsibility for your emotions, understand who you are, because these are all important things to live a happy life. It's very hard to sell you shit when you're comfortable with yourself, though. Exactly. Yeah. So, there's a lot to profit when people are in a state of neediness, desperation, and fear. And there's a great machine that's churning all of that out, the fear and all of that, to keep people in kind of spiritual wheelchairs. They're, everyone's walking around with spinal injuries, and no one knows where to go to get rehab, and everyone's just normalized, the deformity, if you like. And as a result, we have a world that's just, it is what it is. When you actually propose to people that are already feeling completely overwhelmed, under the pump, with very little time, certainly very little time for themselves, not getting a huge amount of reprieve, not getting a huge amount of pleasure and gratification, get little windows of it, and they generally involve alcohol or some other substance that's going to kind of numb the system or alter the system in some way that just provides some relief from the pressure and the tension, the anxiety that they're feeling. To say, actually, I want you to feel that anxiety and pressure and tension more. It's a tough sell. It's a tough sell to get somebody to prospectively go in there. The people that are coming to this work have been resisting it for so long that they get into such a state that they end up in a breakdown and they are choiceless. They realize that the alcohol and the drugs and the gambling and the porn and the, whatever, the likes on Instagram and all of this kind of stuff that we become addicted to in order to distract us from the reality of what we're experiencing in our bodies, it becomes unsustainable, and they're forced to confront it. And thankfully, there are people like yourself that, hopefully they'll discover and, be able to begin their journey of understanding how to unravel it. But to answer your question, that's my take on it, is that people are up to here with discomfort and pressure, and it's a hard sell to get them to go in and prospectively, dive into that stuff if they aren't in absolute crisis. Most people come to this work when they hit a crisis point. It was the same for me. I was at crisis. As a teenager, I was having an identity crisis. I was like, I am done with this crazy world. Let me just go and sit by a beautiful river in India and just sit quietly and enjoy myself. Not have to worry about earning money and, all of this stuff. It just made no sense to me. Unfortunately, I, reconciled a lot of that and rendered myself somewhat useful. But, it's tough. And, we need to be very, as facilitators of this work, I found that the more in touch with the reality of that I am, the more relatable I am to a broader spectrum of people, and more my sensibility is appealing to people that would otherwise be like, nah, I don't know about that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm like, I spend a lot of time reflecting on the human condition, and it's important that we never lose touch from where we came from. What it's actually like to not have awareness of ourselves and feel suffocated by anxiety and feel defeat, the depression of defeat.
I was coaching this lady in Canada.
Many people are experiencing.
I was coaching this lady in Canada on something very similar to along these lines today, and it was this rub of, I don't want to give you the exit strategy to the challenges you're feeling right now, because I know that those challenges are serving you, right? Like right now, that calamity, that crisis is, you're just there, sister. Like you're just there. Like, but one of the things, that I find myself saying in coaching as well is, and similar to echo your sentiments, is, did you ever stand a chance? And I don't say this from a place of like disempowerment, but more so like, society is rigged a certain way. Like we said, like, I oftentimes reflect on this. I'll go to the local supermarket, or like the local shops or whatever, and there's this massive billboard, of this person in his, let's just take a bloke for an example. This bloke in his Bonds undies, and for those that don't know Bonds that are tuning in from it, there's like this stereotypically Aussie fit athletic brand, right? And he's got this 8-pack. It's like maybe a 12-pack, right? And I'm looking at this sign and I'm like, there's in this like radius of like maybe a kilometer, there's probably 5 people that look like that. And yet there's probably 5,000 people walking past this sign every hour. And we're made to feel inadequate, or, this society, like, and then you walk down the supermarket aisles and there's all these polished versions of like this skincare, this cream, like you got to look like this, you got to look like that. This is the status of beauty. And then like for you, like walking around feeling anxious and like not comfortable in your own skin, I was just like, did you stand a chance though? Like, can you just like, because I find there can be this negative spiral around it, because first of all, you're not living up to the expectations. And then you feel like shit. And then you feel like shit that you feel like shit that you're not living up to the expectations. And then you kind of in this cascading calamity, which is just gets rapidly out of hand. I guess somewhat of the blessing to that is at some point it all comes crashing down because it's too hard to keep up with. And that somehow is the necessary bedrock for you to then break through and finally come home to yourself. But it is a bit insidious in many ways, right?
Yeah. The odds are stacked against the average person. Seeing the truth of themselves based on the light that is within them, as opposed to having to dig deep to find something because they can't bear the pain of not being good enough, beautiful, lovable, adequate, which is the gross illness of the human psyche, is a deeply embedded inadequacy, a self-loathing, and a disdain for anything other than a stereotypical expression of what beauty and sexiness is. And it's, all that stuff you're talking about, it's parasitic to the human consciousness. It's poisonous. And, and you start to sound like an extremist when you say, look, don't expose yourself to those magazines. Don't watch that stuff. Don't. But if you really want to be well, you need to turn off the TV. You need to stop reading beauty magazines and, following, Instagram accounts of people that appear to have perfect lives. Because anybody that appears to have a perfect life on Instagram, all they're doing is working on their Instagram account.
Yeah.
And that's no life to live. So yeah, it's tough. And, but once we glimmer the light of the truth of ourselves, that ignites us. There is a nectar, a sweetness that overrides all the luring of, these kind of cheap, nasty candy that just makes us sick. The nectar of our being is the sweetest thing that we've ever tasted, but doesn't make us sick. It just, the more we taste it, the more it makes us feel well. We start to see our eyes glimmer from it. It's Amrit. It's what your name is. The Amrit. Good. It is the nectar of the gods. That's the meaning of Amrit, just in case you haven't told that to your listeners.
Sure. It is lies. I've got a lot to live up to. Yeah. Let's just call it that. Yeah. Maybe the podcast serves you in such a way. Fingers crossed, toes crossed. All my prayers. This is what the expression of our own being, the glimmering our own being does, is it enlivens us in this way and nurtures us from the inside. It causes rejuvenation, healing, recovery. That's why meditation is such an important thing, because it just takes us there. It exposes us to this place and we bathe in it. And quite frankly, I just don't know how people deal with life without it. I'm sure I'd be a sort of a bumbling mess without meditation. I'd just be... Shit, you and me both, actually. I'd still be stuck in my depression and God knows what. Wow, no. No, thank you. Yeah, huge. Man, thank you so much. I've got a question for you. What does inspired evolution mean to you? When you hear that, what is it? What lands at your end? What does it invoke? What do you hear?
Inspired evolution. Well, inspiration is the impulse of nature's creative intelligence expressing itself through me. So if I have inspiration, it's just, the intelligence of the universe tickling me from the inside, urging me to be expressive of something. And evolution is all that's ever happening. So, it's kind of like, you could say inspired, inspirational, evolutionary, evolution. Inspired evolution is like the same thing, really. It's just it's two different expressions of the one thing. Inspiration is the intelligence that is the experience of the intelligence that drives evolution, and evolution is the outcome of the inspiration. I
love that. Thanks, Jonni. And just for those tuning in, hey, Jonni's got his own podcast where you've got questions that you can ask Jonni. And Jonni, what's been one of your favorite questions that you've been asked? I know. There's a whole podcast dedicated to this, but I got to ask, man. I got to ask.
Yeah.
I get the opportunity to ask Jonni anything. I got to ask.
I don't have a favorite question, but I have a favorite type of question. It's the ones where people are asking about, things that are super personal. Because it takes a lot of courage for people to get vulnerable. We record our podcasts. We'll record like 15 episodes in a day. It's an event, where we have it in my studio here up in Mullumbimby. And we invite, 30, 40 people, and they come, they hang out. We have 2 chairs and a mic. And one by one, people courageous enough come up and ask a question. And it can be something to do with the universe, something to do with the meditation, something to do with what's going on in them personally. And I just give a sort of a candid response in a 20-minute slot, sometimes shorter. My favorite kinds of questions are the ones where people really share something very personal and ask me something very personal, because they're the episodes that have the greatest impact on listeners, because I'm able to really get in there and talk to this person and demonstrate how you can meet the challenge that you're being presenting. I can show how the knowledge is actionable, rather than just talking about it in a sort of a nebulous, global, conceptual way, And then at the end of my response, there's a resolution that's taken place immediately in front of me.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about recording a podcast. Someone's come and they've left with some resolve, which is like, double whammy, bang. I love it. Yeah. So, and because it requires courage, to go public with, getting vulnerable publicly. It's where it's at, and I just love that. It just makes my podcast experience so rewarding. I love doing it. I think we're going to plan to do one. I've got a little baby coming 3 weeks from the day.
Congratulations!
A little boy.
Yo!
Yeah. So I would love to record another series before he arrives, because I can't imagine we're going to do anything
after
much.
That.
Snuggle this little guy for at least
all those micro moments. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Wow. Thank you so much, brother. I'll put a link to your show actually in the show notes to this episode, so people to link back into, tune into. You can potentially tune into how to ask Jonni more questions yourself, or tune into some of the questions that he's answered already. Man, Jonni, there is so much depth to this conversation, and yet I feel like we're just scratching the surface. So I feel like this is probably the first of many episodes to come.
I hope so. I'd like to continue with you, mate. Yeah.
Thank you, Brother Bear. And just on the thank yous, I want to thank you for obviously your time, energy, presence here today. But, foolishly or unfoolishly, I know that it's not just today that informs this conversation. It's a lifetimes of work, and maybe lifetimes of work. If you're tuning into the bed that's there. Man, I just want to thank you for bringing all of that with you here today, and sharing that with myself and the Inspired Evolution audience, on behalf of myself and the audience, and the tribe. Thank you so much, man. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, mate. Same goes. I think what you're doing is really wonderful, and I just wish you all the best with everything, and I look forward to us having another little conversation at some other point, and just continuing the conversation, sharing in the good work.
Thank you, Brother Bear. I'm sure I'll see you in my visits up to Mullumbimby soon.
You better.
And for those tuning in, Inspired Evolution Tribe, we love you. Obviously we do. We're sharing with you with such depth and such vulnerability. The potency, the strength of everything that we're sharing is here to help you, designed entirely to help you inspired to evolve. So stay inspired, keep evolving. As always, I'll see you next week. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave us a comment, and if you want to stay in tune for new episodes launching every Monday, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay inspired to evolve.